So for my sketchbook, I'm in need of a few more one-shots. As you can see, we have a little bit missing here towards the end, where we just have some of the base one-shots here and here. And I need more stuff happening in between there. And then I would also like some extra one-shot stuff happening over here. And maybe a bit in here as well, because this is getting also a little bit boring for the track. And usually I spend a lot of time in synthesizers making different one-shots and that kind of stuff. But I want to try doing things a little bit differently, because I think having effects plugins and using those more and more in your sound design allows you to get deeper into certain parts of the sound design. So for example, today I want to do that with Polyverse Filterverse. So what I would do is I would make a clip that is going to trigger that. In this case, I'm going to use Serum 2 because I might want to do a bit more sound design going into this. But I'm going to start off with just a blank saw wave. Let's get a spot for a one shot here and let's just make a clip. Gonna put one individual note over here. This is where we have a little bit of a kick drum thing, so I'm going to go one area before us. And what would be cool is to, instead going in here and sound designing like I've done with all of the other sounds that I have in my one-shots group as well as in my sketchbook, is I want to do it all with Filterverse. So we're going to keep this a saw wave, and I'm just going to go into, I believe it's under EQ here, Filterverse. Now, of course, I could go in here and I could start preset browsing, doing stuff like that. But I think to start off, to experiment, I want to try and just do some stuff from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to go with the evil filter because that is nice and distorted. And therefore it's going to have a lot of character and that will make it probably easier to work with. Yeah, let's just set a little bit of drive, a little bit of the damage here. And then let's move it around so that we can set up an automation here for the filter cutoff and see what that does. Ready, we get some sound out of it, but I would like it to be quite a bit louder. And then just try to get the most tonality out of it. I like what it's doing here at the start. It's not consistent though. There's a cool tonality to it. Can do something with that self oscillation if we just modulate it down or automate it down like this. Already going from a standard saw wave to something like that in just one filter is very, very interesting. But I think the most interesting part is if you start combining them. And probably what you would want to do is get to more and more complex filters afterwards. So for example, now I would use something, say like the fractalizer here. So maybe slight bit of movement on the filter cutoff like this. That's cool. And then the final filter is probably going to be something a little bit more complex still, like the coils, for example. Bit of stereo wave is always nice. Something like that is cool. Now you may say, oh, you're using Filterverse. I would really like to have Filterverse. Well, then I have good news. There's an affiliate link right in the description. So if you purchase Filterverse or any of the other Polyverse plugins, I get a little bit of a kickback. And of course, that massively helps the channel. So if you're interested in that or plugins and software for other companies, make sure to check out the affiliate links in the description. With this sound, I do want to clean it up a little bit, but I like that we're already getting to just a different kind of sound than your standard saw wave. And the cool thing is, because we've done all of this in a Filterverse instance and we haven't done anything with the actual sound design, we could still go back and say, okay, let's see what happens if we just change the patch at the beginning. Like, let's see real quick what happens if we just use a different oscillator. And I'm just going to use the tones from my tones pack for that. You're going to get different textures, but with the same modulation and the same kind of tonal shift over time happening, of course. Some of these are maybe better than others, but let's start with a stereo signal as an input. Now we get a nice white sound out of that. And another thing that we could do is, for example, an extra modulation on this as well. So let's have this start high and then go low, like so. In this case, that means that for some reason we don't get that nice click anymore, which is cool. I like that. Sometimes you have a case where doing sound design in front of it makes a big change, and sometimes you have cases where it just doesn't make a change whatsoever. So in this case, it feels like it's not really caring about what I do in front of it. Let's just keep adding a few extra effects until we get like an actual big change maybe. Let's see if we get some of that. Let's see if we get some of that phaser texture in here. That's an interesting one. Of course, another thing that we can do now that we have changed the sound in front of it is turn off some of these filters and see if that is making a change. I think that's a really cool sound. I would like to try the fractalizer after it. I believe like that. That's really cool sounding. Let's see what happens if we put them in parallel instead. I mean, with the one turned off, what we could also do is have it go through 3 here. This one is very, very loud, so let's turn that down a bit. Still get a little bit of that extra movement in there. But that's already cool sound. And now to turn this into an actual one-shot, we do have to do a little bit more processing. Get rid of that low frequency stuff there and then just turn it off there. And then echo. Like it to be less noisy here in the lower frequencies. Maybe this filter cutoff, let's have it go like that. Maybe like so. And then I would like filter 2 to come in over a bit more volume, or to have like a little bit of input volume coming in over time like this, so that it doesn't start with that secondary zap. Yeah, now it just starts coming from the high frequencies, and then like the lower tone from this second parallel filter is going to come in over time as well, kind of helping with that zap. So that's really cool. Let's move on to make the delay itself a little bit more interesting. And I'm again just going to use Filterverse for that. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can get myself a nice rhythmic preset here. And honestly, the first one that I chose is kind of exactly what I want. Just a little bit of detail on the tail there. In order to make sure that it actually does that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a dry wet that is going to come in on the tail. And here we can hear, we get that nice sound out of that little area there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the gain here to make sure that it's restricted to this area. We're gonna have it go a little bit louder here and then set this to 0 so that we can render this out and do some interesting stuff with that. I'm gonna move it one forward again, like this. I know that I want to record anyway because we can see CPU is not really liking what I'm doing. It's also not liking one of these filters. Number 3, for some reason, is outputting constantly. It also seems to have input here. No, this guy is. Oh, we still have the Q factor low here. One of the things that you have to be careful with some of these filters is once it turns into red, because then it starts to self-oscillate. And you can see that that just means that we are going to get a constant output, which might not be exactly what you want. So therefore, with these Q values or these resonant automations, I try to make sure that the area where it can actually self-resonate and where it can start to make a sound like we have over here is as small as it can be. So you don't get those annoying, like low humming notes, even when you're not playing back the sound and you just put the cursor in an unfortunate spot. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to record this. We get a nice little zap sound out of that. I would like this to be a little bit more rising over time. So I'm actually going to increase the gain a lot more. That's already cool, but I would like it to be a little bit lower in the middle, right? I wanted to have a big sound here, then lower for the first half, and then really rise towards the second half. That's maybe a little bit too far. Okay, I want it in the end to go up faster, but I don't want it to go up as much over here, essentially. Now a sound like this, we can use that to put that in some kind of fill where it fits. So we made this for 2 bars. In this case, I'm thinking to actually put it in this fill here, because it can match with some of the other sounds that we have. So I'm going to just move that right over here, where the fill is. And we can definitely fit that in with a little bit of extra effects and whatnot. But what I do want to focus on for today is more the sound design through effects kind of workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one shot and put it in my sketchbook, meaning that it's going to be in need of being actually added to the track, which for me is a little bit more of a specific process where I have a little bit of a different consideration than just like the sound design that I'm doing. In this case, I'm going to delete this original version entirely because I don't want to be able to get back into it. And that means that I'm going to have this just individual audio file that I have to work with, that I just have to fix into the track. What I'm thinking is I'll do one more one shot that is going to sit in here and that is going to nicely fit in this area. I talked about before how I needed more stuff to fill up the spaces in between these main one shots that we have. And then towards the end here, we already have a bunch of stuff, but I would like maybe 1 or 2 more there as well. The main thing that we're going to need is like small stabs and that kind of stuff. So again, I'm going to just get Serum 2 for now for saw wave, because what I would like to try is a little bit more of the modulation stuff, and specifically audio rate modulation in Filterverse on the filter. And what that means is that I would like to be able to send this MIDI. The way that you do that, you group your main MIDI track here, and then, or your main instrument, and then we need to create a new track that is going to run in parallel. So this is actually going to generate the audio and output stuff for Filterverse to process. And then in here, we want to go to Instrument and then External Instrument. Now, this doesn't really make sense because we're not actually going to target an instrument. We're just going to target Filterverse. But we can set it to run on its own track. So 118 here. And then, as you can see, we target Filterverse right below that. In this case, Filterverse is the only thing that we can target. But that means that right now we should be able to use, for example, the MIDI in here to get the note value and use that as something. What I was hoping for was the oscillator here, which we can tune by MIDI. So just to test this oscillator setup, I've turned it up by 24 semitones. And with the triggering, that is when you're able to see when it's going to make a sound and when it's not. By default, it is always going to make a sound if I turn off the triggering. And then we can hear if I play different notes. It follows those notes. In this case, we don't actually care for the audio output itself. We're just going to use this as a modulator. And what I'm going to do with it is I'm thinking of just doing one of these fairly simple filters and just modulating fairly strongly here. So having it go up and down here would be nice. Maybe like that, because of course it is bipolar modulation, as you can see. In this case, what we do want to do is we want to set a random phase of 0 here. And I believe we have to do the same in Filterverse to make sure that it always re-triggers in the same way. So I think re-trigger this will always get us the same sound. Yeah, that's cool. And we can hear, we already get a little bit of that shifting sound, which is kind of what I would expect if we're doing filter FM in a way. You get like a little bit of that zap from that, which is nice. You can try some variations on this. I really like this tone here. That's very cool, coming out of a saw wave and just one modulator here. I would love a little bit of stereo width for this, so I'm going to specifically go for, say, like a space one here. I believe this does come with stereo options. There we are. And I'm just mixing this in as kind of like a stereo layer. And then finally, we would want probably like a main bandpass for this. 24 dB kind of bandpass. Bit more resonance. That's cool. So therefore what we can do is we just play one note. Again here. And then filter 3 is going to modulate down or automate down. Like that, just like a little zap there. And then we add our delay, of course, to get our nice trippy effect. And that's again a really cool sound that isn't really made in your traditional way. And therefore you're just gonna have a different workflow. It is maybe going to be a little bit more fun for you if you're into doing effects kind of stuff and you're not really into always getting everything in the quickest way possible. Because let's be real, the sound that we just made, this like gritty FM sound with a bandpass on it, there's many easier ways that I can make it just in Serum. But what I don't have is this particular workflow of making it. And I can now go in here and change very specific settings that may have an influence on the sound in a way that in Serum itself I wouldn't be able to do. Kind of get different tonalities out of it. cool sounds coming out of the self-resonating part of this filter here. A bit more of a reverb sound out of it as well, could be cool. Giving it just a little bit of pre-delay as well, and giving it a bit more detune. Like, there's definitely a different workflow in here than, of course, what I'm doing inside, say, Serum, or what you would be doing inside of Vital. And as I said before, we still have the possibility of going in here and now saying, oh, I'm gonna, I don't know, set up some kind of FM over here. FM from B, turn that up, and let's set a sync and then a plus on that to get this kind of wavetable here. Again, in this case, a lot of the sound that we're making is going to come just from Filterverse. So it's not really going to care seemingly, but it might be cool to, for example, add a little bit of diffusion in here. So I'm going to set up 2 diffusers, both in the same way. Let's just turn up the stages and then like change the filter cutoff like this and this. I'm hoping that, yeah, let's turn this guy down. Filter 1 is gonna have oscillator A. Let's turn you down. Maybe having a movement through it will be nice as well. Something like that as a start. Now let's see what that does in Filterverse. Absolutely nothing. Interesting. So as you can tell, it's going to be very dependent on the setup whether a change in front of it is going to matter or not. In this case, I think the main reason why it doesn't matter is because we have the oscillator in here and because we're using that first filter. So maybe just going through the space and then the main bandpass is going to be what we want. Doesn't seem to do too much. I mean, this is a very interesting sound like this, but let's set it down to 12 on this guy. Or maybe just exactly the MIDI that we have. Yes, cool. I like that. That is giving us a nicer sound. So now turning these back on. Something like that with the space only and without the bandpass, maybe. Or maybe we want both of them again in parallel. So 2 and 3 in parallel. Now get a reverb sound, which I'm going to actually turn up to fully wet. 100% wet, and then boost it a little bit more so that this is going to act like slightly more than 50% dry wet in the parallel chain. Right, we're gonna get slightly more space than Swiss Army knife here. Very loud now. But we're just going to get a little bit of that zap and then the rest is going to come through with the whole frequency. And therefore, I guess we get less of the individual texture of either of these sounds and it become more a morphed version of the both of them. And maybe now, because of that, making differences and making changes over here has more influence on the actual sound that we're hearing. See what happens if we add a bit of distortion, chorus here. I think high feedback, low depth, I should say. And then I wanted something else, which is another phaser. So let's again, feedback, depth down here, just so that we get some strange changes to the spectrum. Get rid of too much low and high frequency, because I feel like I'm getting a lot of high kind of frequency noise here. Something like this is already sounding a lot cooler. I would like the space to be more dampened and turn off quicker. More like a chorus almost. So something like that. Now I think we have another cool sound. Now the final thing that I will say is that you have to be a little bit careful with this workflow. It is a very cool workflow in that you're doing a lot of the stuff outside of your main synth. But it also means that you're probably going to use a lot more CPU, because when it comes to CPU, Filterverse is of course its own like whole plugin, and doing a lot of heavy stuff in here and loading up another plugin like Serum is definitely going to do more on your CPU than only loading Serum and doing all of the heavy sound design in there. Of course, going to depend on exactly what kind of processing that you're doing, but you can probably see from the CPU meter here that we're getting a little bit of extra CPU use that we normally wouldn't. I'm at like 40% here. And even though, yes, this is a big, well, not really big project, it's under 200 tracks, so it's decent. But even though this is a decent project, that amount of CPU use is definitely very, very high for me. And that definitely has to do with the fact that I'm now using another plugin and essentially doing a lot of the stuff that I would be doing in Serum while also using Serum to do sound design stuff. So it's definitely going to be just heavier on the CPU this way, but I think it opens up more possibilities and it opens up different ways of thinking about sound design, which in my opinion allow for some really cool creative new ideas. So that's everything that I wanted to talk about for today. I hope that you enjoyed it and I hope that I could spark some inspiration. Let me know if you did by leaving a like and make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Another way to support it is of course by checking out some of the affiliate links which I mentioned earlier. That does really help me growing what I do here, because I can take that little kickback and invest it back into the channel.